Shalom Talmidim, we are at the point where it is time to go to the next step. We know that the Mishnah is the teachings of the Tanaim, the Torah Sheba'al Peh, right? The ideas and lessons and rules, halachot taught to Moshe Rabbeinu at Har Sinai, given over generation to generation until it finally hits the point of the Tanaim, where there is another step. The next generation is that of the Amoraim, and that is taught in the Gemara or the Talmud. The same thing. I'm going to learn a little bit about what that is before we start to do it, because we're at a point where it is a good time for a first step into doing that. So, Mishnah, we said, is the teachings of the Tanaim. It is the Torah Sheba'al Peh, given in very short messages, short teachings in the Mishnah. Now, the Tanaim taught other things as well. They also taught what is called a baraita. A baraita literally means bara is like outside in Aramaic. That word is in Aramaic. Tanaim is actually also a word in Aramaic. Aramaic is very similar to Hebrew, but not exactly the same. And a teaching of Tanaim that did not make it into the Mishnah is called a baraita. Now, we don't have a book of baraita per se. There's certain books of other teachings of the Tanaim, such as the Tosefta, but the baraita is not a book. It is teachings that people had memorized and had kept in the Masorah, in the tradition, and then are quoted in the Gemara. For the most part, the Baraita are going to be found in the Gemara quoted, and they're the same Tanaim, right? They're the same authority as the Tanaim taught in the Mishnah. The Mishnah is slightly higher authority technically, but they're the same people. And what's going to happen sometimes is they're going to have two different things. Sometimes the Mishnah and the Baraita have machloket. They might contradict each other, or they might, more accurately, seem to contradict each other. Now, it can't be that the Mishnah and the Baraita really are contradicting each other, have that machloket. You could have Tanaim that have a machloket. That's okay. But to have a Mishnah that seems to be the same people or the same idea taught separately in a Baraita is a problem. We have to figure out how do we solve that problem. Now, sometimes there is also just a machloket in the Mishnah, and we need to know who is right. Sometimes there's just questions about what is meant in the Mishnah. All these things are going to be the job of the Gemara. When the Gemara sees that a Mishnah and a Baraita have a machloket or seem to contradict each other, when there's a machloket in the Mishnah, we need to know who do we follow? What should we do? Or if there's a machloket about the Mishnah and it's not clear, the Gemara is going to take a step to try to solve that. They're going to use different arguments, different ways of exploring the text to try to come up with an answer to that question. Now, the speakers in the Gemara, if it's a Baraita or a Mishnah being quoted, is the Tanaim. But after the Tanaim, the students of the, and we're talking about this period of hundreds of years of Tanaim, and then also hundreds of the Amoraim are the Amoraim. They are these students, mostly in Babylonia, modern-day Iraq, Iran, that area. They're, of course, Jewish, but they were a big community, and they had yeshivot, and that's where they would study the Mishnah, the Baraita, the Tosefta, and they would come up with all these ways of analyzing them. They ask questions to come up with a better understanding, to kind of really, all the questions we've been asking to have you analyze the Mishnah this year have been Gemara thinking, trying to get us to think like the Amoraim. They compared the Mishnayot and the Baraitot. They also used logical Gemara thinking to help better explain the Mishnah, try to understand what it meant better, sometimes give background information and try to understand from the fact that this says this and this says this, how can we understand the two of them and how can we learn from that to a new case, so we understand what it's really about. Now, just like the Chumash has Mefarshim, just like the Mishnah has Mefarshim, some of those this year, the Rishonim are the Mefarshim for the Gemara. The Rishonim explain, they discuss the Gemara, they give us extra information that we might need, sometimes to define words, and the main Mefarsh on the Gemara, most of the Gemara, is Rashi. Same Rashi as in Chumash, same Rashi as in Tanakh, he can be found on the inside of the page of the Gemara. Tosafot is another main Mefarsh of the Gemara. He's much more complicated. Really, it's a school of people, it's not just one person. and it's a group, many of them are related to Rashi actually, and they will kind of discuss what Rashi says and sometimes argue on it, sometimes explain it. It's a more advanced way of learning. We're not going to be doing that this year, but it is coming attractions in future years. So the Gemara, as a quick background here, is something that we're going to get to more later in the year. This is going to be our first time looking at it with our Sugya, but it can be really fun. It can be really enjoyable to get to the depths of understanding something and really go through and have this contradiction, have this kasha, have this problem, and then be able to explore that, go through it, and really understand, come to a good conclusion, come to a good clearance. We're going to learn more about that later, but this is the basic introduction we need to be able to move forward in our discussion.